One of the points that we mentioned previously was engaging and educating the public to achieve more access to sanitation and also high efficiency of wastewater treatment. How do you think engaging the public and educating them could contribute in solving this issue?
Yeah, it's very true. There are so many ways. For example, if we know about this issue, we are going to decrease environmental issues, and also there is an issue of changing the mindset of us Africans.
I think this could be now achieved, what Mr. Kemford has just mentioned. This could be achieved by now involving all stakeholders. Now, if you involve all stakeholders, it means you build trust, you build loyalty, and then you can achieve this goal of clean water in our communities.
Yeah, building trust is really important. Speaking about implementation of policies, successful policies, let me say, and also implementation of huge projects under the government. If there is mutual understanding or mutual trust between both sides, it will increase the possibility of success of such policies and such projects. And sometimes it will reduce the cost because you don't need to do like campaigns, and maybe the general public will participate somehow in some of the elements of the project or the policy, so it will reduce the initial cost of implementation. But how do you think we could achieve this? Which level of education or which kind of education could be implemented for the general public in our country?
Generally, I believe this can be introduced from the grassroots level, being from elementary schools up until institutions of higher learning. In that way, it could reach as many as possible because of those that are involved at schools and universities. But there's a certain way in which it won't reach those that, for example, are in the rural areas. So perhaps at this stage we could also think of other ways so as to reach as many people as possible other than those found within the institutions of higher learning.
I think to put it in context, what my colleague is saying is that we need to use both formal as well as informal. What do I mean by formal? Formal is the primary, secondary, and also tertiary institutions. So in all these levels, we need to make it compulsory, the way we do English in our countries. Like everybody should know how to speak English. So it's compulsory. So it should also be a case that anyone, starting from primary school, anyone should be taking wastewater education, either at a small scale, at each level, for example, in primary school, secondary school, as well as at the higher school. Now, in terms of informal, we can use normal public gatherings like churches and others for this information to go to the people.
Maybe just in addition to what you've just talked about, Africa is a very diverse continent. We have different cultures, so we have to now look at like how do we pass the message. We're talking about the languages. We need to educate these people in terms of their own native languages. That will be easier for future reference. Now, another issue is in terms of schools also. You've just mentioned it, but now in schools, we need to now put the system of local language, native language. I think it makes more sense. If you talk to me in my own language, sometimes it's more easier to reflect what you're talking about. I think that makes sense.
I agree with that, and I think that also using the local language would be somehow difficult to prepare material in all our local languages. But somehow we could also implement kind of pilot projects that train the trainer from different backgrounds, different languages, and then they could take it from there to reach to everyone in our countries. So they will be kind of like the leaders for those, I think, projects, and also making them understand and train the people will make them understand the mission more and believe in it. But you mentioned previously about the point of distribution challenge. Could you tell us more about the places or the locations where those kind of initiatives could take place?
I think I talked about use of existing channels or use of existing structures. For example, the church, the mass rallies and others, whereby people usually gather normally in the mosques. So we can tell the sheikh that at the climax of the service, he should just pause a little bit. Then I think he bring in this wastewater issues because it really affects us. So it will make an impact.
But do you think speaking about it is just enough? Like just someone coming and telling you there is an issue, we need to solve that issue, we need to speak about that issue. Is it enough just to use speaking or presentation skills, public speaking as a tool for delivering this kind of important information?
Yeah, it will be really very important because if we can use, for example, use comedy in order to disseminate this information, I think it will be very useful. For example, in my country, we can use influential gatherings whereby a lot of people are going to gather. So at that particular, especially where there are maybe TV stations, radio stations are beaming that particular function. So the information is going to almost half of the population, and it is also going to be taken by the people because it will be disseminated in a funny way. So people will take that information. Yeah.
That's really interesting, but is it applicable in all countries? What about your countries?
Perhaps for my home country, I think what could work in this regard, especially concerning the topic of wastewater, I believe our local artists and celebrities have a role to play in this regard, whereby they go to an extent of composing songs about wastewater. I think in that way they could entertain us, but at the same time delivering a message. So in that way we will be able to be conscientized about how important wastewater topic is, and in that way the message will really reach us, or rather as many people as possible.
Also, to add on that, for instance, in this modern day and era, everyone now uses a cell phone, right? So if you pass this message through maybe small text, maybe now we're talking network companies, now they provide the service. Also, there will to be some sort of corporate social responsibility. Just a simple message after maybe loading maybe data on your phone. Another era,
A message.
for instance, a message, maybe it's wastewater too. And then another one is like public transport. So in Africa, most people use public transport. So in this transportation system, you can put your posters there. But more, I think what would work, it's more of you have these recordings relating to wastewater. It takes time to sink in, but I think with time and effort, we need to look into the future. We're not talking 5 years, we're not talking 2 years. We're talking about like sustainable way. We're talking about a journey. It's not just a short run, like it's not 100 meters. We're talking about 1,500 meters. We're talking like how far the vision needs to be seen from afar. Yes.
That's really interesting because you're speaking about sustainability and seeing it from far and how it could sustain for the next generation could be also a challenge for such initiative. We understand that speaking about the background of the people and how this could be delivered to them through different tools, different channels, but how could we really sustain it? Without just saying we need to sustain it, how could we make sure that this could continue for more than 6 months or 1 year or 2 years?
I think for me, talking of sustainability, how you can sustain the various projects that you embark in, doesn't have an easy answer. It's not like a 1+1 issue. It's an issue that if we have a solution to it, I think most of the challenges that we have today would go very well. So we'll have to stick to the existing channels, for instance. What we have in place when we look around, I think my colleague has mentioned churches, community gatherings. I think these are free platforms. So why not take advantage of these platforms? Because they are free. So then naturally the aspect of sustainability just comes in. That would be my contribution.
Maybe just for maybe a question or is it a statement somewhere somehow, but I'll be expecting something from you, maybe just an addition. We're talking about now trying to change or trying to revolutionize this wastewater treatment techniques and stuff. Now, could you just tell me, like for instance, do we have to be impacted by this first for us to act, or do we have to now try to take it step by step? Can you just fill me in maybe about your views on that one?
Yeah, speaking of impact, I think it's very easy for people to really act, and they can see the direct impact between this and that. We're talking about wastewater. You don't manage your wastewater correctly, you end up, for instance, getting sick. But again, I think that's being proactive. I mean, that's being reactive rather. That once you see this problem, there's always the best solution is that you are more proactive. That before this happens, and that's the reason why we're having such a platform that we discuss these matters and envision that if these are not in place, you end up having this kind of consequences. So for me, it's important that these matters are discussed and be able to see how they are related to each other.
Maybe to add salt on the healing wound, I think I need to give my real example. For example, when I was in Standard 4, I had a very terrible experience, which taught me a lesson that I should not forget. There was an outbreak of cholera in my rural area. So people were dying, friends, relatives, and even my beloved teacher died during that particular time. It really pained me a lot. And the health workers usually used to go around in the villages telling us that for us, I think to prevent this kind of disease, what we should do is we need to wash hands. And also, whenever we want to drink water, don't just drink, we need to add chlorine in it. So that issue sank in my mind. And also another issue on top of this, I think these days, I think we need at least a little bit, we need to instill fear. We need to have messages that can instill fear in the people. For example, I learned that it was a terrible experience, but maybe we don't have that experience now. We can have those messages that can instill fear in the people. Like I saw a certain clip talking about corona. I think once you finish maybe looking at that clip, I think it instills you that I think you need to take care of yourself. You need to wear masks and the like. So those messages maybe can come after, maybe before the news. If it is on TV, maybe before the news. I think where people, you know that most of the people come and gather and listen to that kind of. So that kind of message come at that particular point. I think that can be very, very important issue.
I think here we're still speaking about when people feel the impact, and I think with our studies here in Japan and us doing this internship, we understood and we read about how Japan led the environmental change by people when they felt the impact of the hazardous industrial waste that have been discharged and how this affected their life. But is that the right way?
Maybe I think the question at hand here is, we're not talking about, we have to maybe say, we have been impacted by this. The problem now is not, we don't feel the impact, right? For instance, how do we act? How do we make this effort of trying to maybe raise awareness? Is there any structures in place back home? What are the efforts that we can maybe collaborate or try to come up with maybe solutions for this? What's the way forward? Can maybe someone try to add a bit, maybe enlighten me a bit? I'm still a bit confused in a way, but let's get in there.
So perhaps, like within the African context, perhaps for us we don't necessarily need to wait for a catastrophe to happen. So in a way we can go the policy way, in a way that those that are in the authority of power, they will somehow draft policies that in a way enforces, let's say, our media houses to publicize this wastewater topic within their channels. It can be radio, it can be TV, or whatever channel that they will use. In that way, this message will somehow reach people and they will be conscientized. And again, within the institutions of learning, so they can impose it in a way and make it part of their curriculum that wastewater will be taught from grassroots level up until universities. In that way, it could really conscientize us and solve the problem related to wastewater.
This was a very interesting discussion, speaking about not only waiting for the impact to happen, but also leading the change before, and also learning from others' experience, not just trying to implement something that maybe might not work, and also taking it into the direction or the way that we think that it could succeed based on the background of the people and their understanding, and how we are going to implement it either by policy or by initiatives led by the people. All those informations and points that have been discussed today, I think, is very important and could help us in leading the change to have more education and engaging the public in terms of wastewater treatment in our countries. Thank you.